And in the Bhagavad-gita, it speaks a lot, especially around the middle of the Bhagavad-gita in the 6th chapter. It speaks a lot about the mind. And since Kalen just mentioned about mindfulness, then it discusses how the mind can be our best friend or it can be our worst enemy. And we probably all have some experience of this. Sometimes people say, what are you talking about when you say the mind? You know, and then I usually say, you know, it's that little voice that's saying, what is he talking about? The mind? What is he, why is he saying, what does he mean? You know, it's that little voice that sometimes can give us so much trouble. And, you know, we get into these conversations within ourselves sometimes, where we have almost little arguments within our own head. And sometimes one voice is saying, go ahead, do it, you know, it'll be good. You know, you'll enjoy it. Don't worry, no one's looking. And it's like and then there's the other voice that says, oh no, I don't think that's the best thing to do. You should, no, it's better not to, you know, don't have another chocolate. No, not one more chocolate bar, you know, no, it's best not to. Not another donut, not another cupcake, not another piece of cake. Oh no, don't do it. You know, so the mind is often giving us some challenges. So the Bhagavad Gita speaks about trying to create a space in which we can try to still the mind and be peaceful. And there are different methods and practices that are recommended in different ages and different times. At the moment, the world that we live in is, as we know, is a little bit chaotic. And the kind of ether, the air around us is permeated with so many things that we can't see that are definitely having an effect on us. There's so many radio waves, television waves, Wi-Fi waves, telephone signal waves. All of these things are in the air, in the atmosphere, the ether around us, and it's having an effect on us. So in the age that we live in, it's not so easy to just sit and meditate. Many times when I speak with people and I say, oh, well, meditation is good. And a lot of times the first thing they say is, oh, I can't meditate. I can't sit still for 5 minutes. You know, they go into a rant. And you can see meditation is not going to be easy for this person. So the Bhagavad Gita recommends different processes for different ages. And in the age that we live in now, then the process that's recommended is called Sankirtan. And that's what we do usually at the end of the program, where we do a little bit of chanting. And it's actually quite simplified. It's described that in other ages, you would have to meditate for like literally thousands of years to achieve spiritual perfection. But in the age that we live in now, which is known as the Iron Age, before there was the Golden Age and the Silver Age and the Copper Age, and we're in the Iron Age now, so it's kind of the worst of all. But the process is much simpler. So we can just by hearing these mantras and chanting, then we can receive great spiritual benefit. But at the same time, there are certain things that can help us along, that are simple techniques that have worked for a very long time. The first one is to just sit up straight. That's not easy if you're lying in bed, but if you're on the beach. I mean, if you're on the moon, I don't know how you'll sit up straight. You know, we have to put your back against a moon rock or something. But sit up straight. And it's described also that we were discussing last week about the soul. And it's described that the soul inside of the body is is uh, is resting on airs, life airs, and these airs are called prana. And maybe some of us are familiar with the yogic technique of pranayam. And pranayam is the technique of breathing. And through the process of breathing, we balance those life airs. So just sometimes by taking simple, deep breaths, we can center ourselves in such a way that we feel much more peaceful and relaxed and at ease. So just for a couple of minutes, I would like for everyone just to work with me. And we're going to take a few deep breaths and just try to find a sort of a calm space in which we can enter into that will help to. And this process can work for more or less anything that you want to do. All of you are studying. So I know a lot of times people drink a lot of caffeine and maybe do a lot of other things that may not be so good just to stay awake to study. But you'd be surprised how much we can increase our mental capacity and the power of our intelligence just by finding a calm space and taking it easy a little bit and relaxing. Not taking it easy like go to sleep, but taking it easy like, just not increasing the kind of passionate nature, but invoking more of a mode of goodness, like that. So let's try for a moment. So we all can try to sit up as straight as possible, and we'll do a little bit of breathing together. So Vishal he's gone to the temple in Hertfordshire now. He's off in the manor. So we'll just take a deep breath. Now the best is, okay, now he's in London. So now we just take a deep breath, and that means breathing in through the nose, and try to breathe into what's known as the diaphragm. This is kind of the stomach, not just into the lungs, but when you breathe in, your tummy should go out. And when you breathe out, your tummy should go in. So it looks like you've got flat abs, like I don't know, some famous stars who work on their bodies. But when you breathe out, it looks like you might be pregnant. Or when you breathe in, your tummy fills up, and then when you breathe out, it sucks in. Okay? So like that. So we just try in through the nose. Ready, everyone? And hold it for a moment, 2, 3, and then breathe out through the mouth. And hold it for a moment, and breathe in again through the nose. And hold it, and breathe out. And hold again. And breathe in through the nose. And hold it. And breathe out. And hold. And this time breathe in and meditate on white light being brought in. Filling yourself with goodness and purity, and hold. And when you exhale, imagine all the darkness and stress and tension leaving. And try again. Breathe in, purity, white light, love, peace, tranquility. And breathe out, stress, anxiety, awkwardness, discomfort. Let it all go. And then breathe in again. Purity, love, light. And breathe out all the nasty stuff, all the things you've dealt with throughout the day. Just let it all go. And then breathe in again. And then breathe out. And allow your shoulders to relax. Stay straight. Breathe in. And hold. And then breathe out. Just be with the silence, the space, inner peace, outer peace, tranquility. Allow yourself to be calm and peaceful. No anxiety. This is a nice space to be. And in this space, our intelligence becomes an open receiver for knowledge and wisdom. Our heart becomes open to the truth, to deeper understanding. And we, the soul, become very receptive to spiritual empowerment and upliftment and reconnecting, going deeper into an understanding of who we are and what our purpose is in life. This is a space of possibility. It's a nice space, huh?
Yes.
Have to be careful though, if you've had a busy day and you do this in the evening at 6, it's very easy to to drift right off. But so that's nice. Hopefully, Kaylin, that helped a little bit.
Yes, that was great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so shall we continue a little bit with the talk, Vrishni? Is that what we were discussing before?
Yeah.
And just to make sure everyone who's been attending, everyone is happy so far with the discussions that we've been having on Bhagavad-gita, and we want to continue, yes?
Yes.
I don't want to be accused of boring anyone to tears. Or
No, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So if everyone is up for it, so we can go ahead and continue. I guess those who are new, who are joining, we'll do a little recap and discuss a little bit, but we're basically discussing the 5 topics of the Bhagavad-gita. Now, Vishal Prabhu, I thought you would have had me all squared up for sharing.
You're on mute, Michelle.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. Sorry. I think you can now.
Yep, there it goes. Perfect. Thank you, Prabhu.
I need to get into the mood as well now.
Okay, so just give me a moment. Okay. All right. So we're looking at the 5 topics of Bhagavad-gita, and we've had, I think, 3 sessions so far on it, or 2 sessions. Maybe it's just 2. Yeah. So these are the five topics that we've discussed about the soul, the nature of the world that we live in, and the nature within, action, karma, and time, kala, and God, Isvara. We discuss a lot of Sanskrit terms because the Bhagavad Gita was written originally in the Sanskrit language, which we also discussed in our first session about how that looks in the book and how we try to make it fit more for the for English. These objectives we've been through several times. We're just trying to really look at the Bhagavad Gita and help to understand its some important points that we can learn from the Gita and its relevance in the modern age. These are the different aspects that we'll touch on. Little recap is we're looking at the Bhagavad Gita that's been translated by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, and he's translated over 70 volumes of books from Sanskrit into English. And the Bhagavad Gita takes place on a battlefield, so it's a very unusual setting or scene for a book that is the source book of all yoga and meditation, the origin of mindfulness and karma and reincarnation. And the Bhagavad Gita is really ultimately a discussion between Arjuna and Krishna, and we discussed the setting of this scene. And Arjuna has become despondent, and he's confused, and he has a lot of questions about what to do and whether to fight or not fight. He feels alone. He feels a little bit lost, a little bit dejected, and he really needs help. And then Krishna begins to give him some guidance. And we explained how this Bhagavad Gita is really a discussion about the search for happiness, and how we're all kind of eager and hungry to find happiness in this world that we live in, and that's not always so easy. But we're by nature looking for happiness, and this brought us to the talk on who am I, and trying to understand who we are, and that this question has been asked for thousands of years, especially by the great sages in India. And they have this aphorism or this phrase in Sanskrit, atato brahma jigyasa, that life begins when one starts to inquire into higher knowledge and inquire into the nature of the world that we live in. And how in the Bhagavad Gita, it's described that who we are is not necessarily the external body that we often identify with. And the body is called a yantra. And in Sanskrit, yantra means a machine. Yantra rudani mayaya, that this body is just simply a machine made of the material energy. And who we are is actually the soul within. And the Vedic aphorism for this is aham, which means I am, and brahmasmi. So aham brahmasmi, that means I am Brahman, I am spiritual, I am by nature, I am not the machine, but I am the driver of the machine. And we discussed how the this spirit soul that resides within the machine, we experience the transmigration even in this life that the spirit is the same spirit that's been in all of these different bodies. So we all started around here as a little baby, and we've moved through life, and now most of you are probably around this age here. You know, you see the little book there. You guys are the book people. You're the people who read lots of books and study. And next, I mean, Vishal already looks like this guy. He's kind of got a mustache already, you know, like that. But you know, we moved to this stage, and then eventually, you know, we're all heading in this direction. A friend of mine, he used to be a rapper, and he wrote a song that was called "Time is a One-Way Street," and you know, you got to go with it. That's it. So time's moving in one direction, no matter how many tummy tucks or face tucks you have, how many times you pull your wrinkles and put them behind your ear, you can't escape the fact that we're all heading in the same direction. So this is the Bhagavad-gita also explains this transmigration from one body to another and introduces the concept of reincarnation, which we'll discuss more in depth later, and how we pass into another body at the time of death. And this cycle, as you can see, it continues. So we also discussed how sometimes we can feel a little bit lost or disconnected living life, living in this world. And we often feel that there must be something more, or that there is something more, but what is it? And we feel this tendency to be looking and searching for something. And that's why we call this the search for happiness, that we're often looking for happiness and not really sure where to find it. And in the process, sometimes we feel alone. We feel really disconnected and not sure where to find people who are like-minded, or to find a place where I can fit in. And then we discussed how the goal of yoga is to reconnect. And what are we reconnecting? We're trying to reconnect that spiritual identity with the origin of that spiritual identity, and the ultimate divinity, to reconnect divinity with divinity. And in this way, this is called bhakti. And this is a main theme of the Bhagavad-gita, which is the process of reconnecting through service, and specifically in a mood of love. So this is also considered a yoga, because the word yoga means to reconnect. Yoga in Sanskrit, translated into English, means union. So reunion. Although many times if you say yoga, people just think of asanas, which is postures and positions, or they may think of meditation. But the actual true sense of understanding of the word yoga is to reconnect. And bhakti is the process of reconnecting through love, through devotional service, like that. So it's very much a heart connection. So today we're going to discuss the topic of Isvara, or God, and the question of, does God exist? Of course, this is a very challenging topic, and for many people this is, especially those who are coming from the science background, then we know that science doesn't often accept the idea of God. In fact, a famous scientist, William Bonner, he explains that the only dogmatism that can be allowed in science is that we can't use God to explain things. So generally, scientists would consider those who are from a religious background to be dogmatic. They just follow without looking at anything else. And so his explanation is that the only dogmatism that can be there is to not use God to explain things. So that's a challenge. Science, obviously, in one sense, we're not against science by any stretch of the imagination. We're using science right now to connect with each other. And so science has its place, but we have to understand that many of the things that science is finding and explaining many of them, they already exist naturally in the world. So they're only taking apart and trying to understand something that's already been created, something that's already there. So some famous scientists that we may know, Albert Einstein is a firm believer in the principle or idea of God. And he says here with this quote that, there are people who say that there is no God, but what makes him really angry is they quote him to support such views. He says that in his view, such harmony in the cosmos, which my limited mind, he believes very firmly that there is a God. And another person is Isaac Newton. Maybe some of you have heard of Isaac Newton. He's, I always understood as he's the man, in school they used to say he's the man who invented gravity. And later I came to realize that he didn't invent gravity. He discovered gravity. But it's like I said, there it is, it's a force, and he may have named it and put some formula on it, but that formula is for something that already exists. So Isaac Newton here says, in the absence of any other proof, the thumb alone would convince me of God's existence, which is quite a strange comment. But if we think about it, of course, just sometimes if you look at the most simple part of your body, it's so complex that, just how we're sitting here talking or listening and having a conversation. Meanwhile, the heart is beating, the stomach is digesting, the mind is functioning, the eyes are batting and focusing, the nostrils and mouth are breathing, the ears are hearing, the lungs are filling, and you're not thinking about any of it. To be perfectly honest, until I said those things, you weren't even thinking about them. But meanwhile, they're all going on. So this body is a miraculous machine that is functioning in such a way that even science still doesn't really understand how the whole thing works. And there's an amazing story that Isaac Newton had, where he built this machine, and it was a model of the universe. And he put this together in his front room, and it had this crankshaft. And when you would crank the shaft, it was on all these gears, so it would then move around as a kind of perfect representation of the solar system. And then one day, one of his scientist friends came around to visit him. And when he came in, Isaac was upstairs, and his friend came in and saw this thing downstairs in his front room. And he started going, Isaac, this is amazing. This is incredible. When did you put this together? How did you do this? Where did this come from? This is incredible. And Isaac Newton came in and he said, what are you talking about? And he said, this model of the solar system, this is phenomenal. Where did this come from? And Isaac said, I don't know. I'm seeing it for the first time. It just came out of nowhere. And he said, come on, Isaac, that's possible. Don't be humble. You put this thing together. How did you do it? It's incredible. He said, no. He said, I've never seen it before. It just appeared. I just came down. It was just here. I don't know where it came from. It came from nothing, came from nowhere. And he said, Isaac, don't be a fool. That's impossible. And then Isaac said, no, you're the fool. You claim that the universe came from nothing, came from some empty space from nowhere. He said, but this model of the solar system, you say it's impossible that it came from nowhere, that I didn't create it. So his point being that there is a creator. There is a creator for everything. And science has a tendency to claim that's not true and try to look at an impersonal or a scientific way. But scientifically, any scientist who finds anything or discovers anything usually names it after himself and tries to take credit for it. So at best we're thieves, just taking what's already been created and sticking our name on it. So this is just an interesting picture I came across of how there are examples of nature and man-made creation and how they parallel each other. But nature is often a much better artist than ourselves. So this one here is a window. It's a rose window in a cathedral in New York, or in York. I think it's in York. And this is the double helix, DNA double helix. So, I mean, if you look at that, you think, well, yeah, which one is man-made and which one is nature-made? So like this, we see that there's so much art occurring naturally. And then the idea of intelligent design is there. And is it intelligent design or is it chance? And this is a scientific concept that was introduced not so long ago. And it's the theory that life of the universe cannot have arisen by chance and was designed and created by some intelligent entity. There's a scientist named Philip Johnson. He's considered the father of intelligent design. And the idea in its current form appeared in, I think, around the 80s. And he adopted and developed it after the Darwinian evolution theory. So there's so much organization and structured systems or laws. And generally, we know that laws imply a lawmaker. So we can see here that this is the natural manifestation of a peacock feathers and fan or tail. And you can see how it looks, the kind of geo makeup of it is so perfect. But yet this all happens by chance. So we have to be honest, sometimes these things do seem, unfortunately, a little kind of silly. And of course, the Big Bang Theory and how astronomers explain the way that the universe began. But what was there just before the bang? And if you ask this question, then they say, well, we're not really sure what was there before the bang, or there was nothing there before the bang. But, you know, how often do we see something coming from nothing? I mean, never really do you see something coming from nothing, you know. But one person described it as, it'd be like if a factory, a publishing house, factory, or a printing house. If a printing house exploded, the chances that out of that printing house, a dictionary in perfect order landed, you know, like somehow it just came from nothing, you know, an explosion in a printing house and there's a perfect Oxford dictionary that just came out of it. Isn't that amazing? How that Oxford dictionary just appeared from that explosion. So, so this is, it's kind of, I mean, if we think about it, it is a little bit ridiculous, but fortunately or unfortunately, these are ideas and concepts that are definitely prominent and being discussed in the world that we live in, and we're often being exposed to them. But, you know, this principle of atato brahma jigyasa means let's inquire, let's look deeper, let's see, is this it? Science says we should look deeper, and we think you should also look deeper. So we'll take a little moment for reflection. Remember I said it's good if you have a journal, there's something to write down on. So we'll do a little reflection moment now. So just on some of the things that we've discussed and a different topic, but in the same vein, is this topic of Darwin's theory of evolution. And so just wanting you to write down in your journal, little journal, big journal, medium-sized journal, whatever journal you have, how do you think you came into existence? And what is the purpose of my life? Now remember, this is your journal. It's your place to keep your private thoughts and messages. And just for a moment, just look. What would be your answer? I'm asking you that question as a friend, and I just, you know, what do you think? How did you come into existence? And what do you think is the purpose of your life? What do you think? Just write down something. Maybe you think, I don't know and nothing. Okay, that's an honest answer. I don't know where I came from. And I think the goal of my life is, purpose of life is nothing. I don't know. But what do you think? Maybe just write something down, even if it's that, even if it's nothing. Or you can say, I came from my mother, and the purpose of my life is to eat donuts. Or you can say, I came from the moon. I came from the moon, and my purpose is to eat moon burgers. So what do you think? Where did you come from, and what is the purpose of life? So the theory of evolution by natural selection was first formulated in Darwin's book called On the Origin of Species. And that was actually in 1859 that he wrote that. And it's the process by which organisms naturally change over time as a result of changes that are inheritable physical and behavioral traits. So it means that because something in nature dictates that my physicality has to change inherently, then new behavioral traits or a new physical body manifests. So in the Bhagavad-gita also, Swami Prabhupada, the author, he explains that this concept that Darwin presents, actually it's come from the Puranas, which is another group of ancient literatures from India, ancient Sanskrit texts. And he says that this concept originated actually in the Puranas, but it's explained slightly differently, in that it's explained that the principle of what's known as Vedic evolution is that it's evolution of species, but that all the species already existed. And actually the evolutionary process is not through the changing of bodies to create the different species, but it's an evolution of consciousness where the soul transmigrates from one body to another. And depending on which body the soul winds up being in, then the body is limited to that consciousness. Now, that's might be a big ask for us to accept, but the Puranas they explain that there are 8,400,000 different species of life. So that number is given, and it explains that those species are aquatics and plant life, and then you have insects, reptiles, amphibians, mammals, and birds in there, and humans. So these are all, and inside of each one of those varieties, you have thousands or millions of different species. So the idea is that the consciousness that is created by the soul, it moves into different types of bodies. And then the evolutionary process is not the evolution of the body, but it's actually an evolution of consciousness by which the soul enters into these different bodies. So that's the Puranic version, but the Puranas actually explain a very similar process, but it's not that the bodies themselves are generated and manifested from one another. They're already there, and then the souls inherit those specific bodies. So in the Bhagavad-gita, when Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, and at one point he starts to explain to him that actually everything emanates from me, which is quite a far out thing. But then Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita, he manifests this universal form, and he reveals kind of himself in a very divine way to Arjuna, because Arjuna has been given what's called divine vision to see this. So he explains how everything is emanating ultimately from a divine or a supreme being. And he describes that, he says, Sutre mani gana iva. He says, just like pearls are strung on a thread, he says, the pearls being strung on the thread, all you see are the pearls, but you don't see the thread. And he explains that I am like that thread that is holding everything together. It's unseen, but without it, everything would fall to pieces. So like this, when pearls are strung on the thread, you can't really see the thread. But without the thread, then the pearls would just scatter hither and thither. So like that. So it's hard to see and understand that there is a supreme being or a supreme working force in the world, but that force is what's keeping everything together. But we can't see it, so therefore we claim it might not exist. So another moment for reflection with your journal. So this reflection, so question, do you ever feel the presence of something higher in your life? Have you ever felt the presence of something higher in your life? Like if you look at this picture, this gentleman has obviously climbed to the top of a very high mountain. I'm not sure where he is. Looks like he might even be somewhere in India, because that looks like it could be Mount Everest in the distance. But imagine being that high up and the feeling that you would get if you've ever hiked to the top of a mountain, or you look out the window when you're flying in a plane and you see the world below you, or maybe sometimes I remember I used to go scuba diving, and I had an experience once when I was scuba diving that was very surreal, and I just felt this presence that was like, it was just, amazing. So like that, have you ever felt the presence of something higher in your life? Maybe it was an interaction with someone. How do you explain that presence? How do you explain that presence? What was it? What was the cause? Where did it come from? Or another question is there something greater than me that's guiding me or protecting me? Have you ever felt that there's something protecting you or looking after you? I remember when I was 18, I left America and I came to Europe, and I spent 3 months just hitchhiking around Europe and on my own. And when you do that, you put yourself out there and you take big chances. And, there were times where things were very intense, and I found myself naturally feeling the presence of something higher, but also feeling that something was looking after me and guiding me. And some really amazing things happened, so like that. So these are the questions. Do you ever feel the presence of something higher in your life? How do you explain that? And do you feel that there's something greater than you guiding you or protecting you? And if so, what? Now, if you live on the moon, for sure you feel the presence of something higher. So just take a moment, just write it down, be real, be honest, and it's fair, no problem. If you say no, okay, then that's fine. It's not a problem. It's not a right or wrong answer. This is just about an exploration of looking deeper and being open to thinking other things. Okay. Right. So the Gita also describes the idea of what's known as God realization, explaining that there are different ways that we can understand the existence and presence of God. And it explains that there are 3 primary stages or ways that you can understand or have revelation of God or a divine being or a divine presence. The first one is called Brahman. And we discussed that earlier. If you remember, I said this aphorism, Aham Brahmasmi. So Brahman is the spiritual energy. So the first way that we can understand that presence is that we sometimes feel a force in nature that's connecting everything, or how everything is interconnected. I mean, you're all young people. I know lots of people, when they're young, they experiment with different types of pharmaceutical things. And sometimes when people do that, they feel everybody's connected, you know? I feel we're all like part of the same thing, and it's so good, you know? We're all love, you know? So sometimes people feel that connectedness. Some people describe it as nature, that they see how nature is just permeating everything. And yeah, it's just, and we'll discuss that more later. But the idea is that there is this energy that permeates through everything, and that energy that's there, that is considered to be an understanding or an aspect of God, and it connects us. Another way that people feel that connectedness is that they feel something within them, or their realization of a godliness, is that within them they feel there's something. Sometimes we describe it as a voice. Sometimes it's described as the super consciousness. Sometimes it's described as just our conscience. Sometimes it's described as the higher being within, or our higher self. But we all have this experience we discussed earlier when we were talking about the mind, where we have this experience of something. We may be thinking, saying something, then we hear this other voice that's saying something, and there's often this voice that's really trying to give us good advice. Unfortunately, we don't always listen to that voice. It's trying to give us good advice. But in the Bhagavad-gita, it's explained that this is an aspect of God that is there present within every one of us and with us. And in that way, this is how God knows what we're thinking, or knows when people pray, or when we meditate, or when we direct something. Sometimes people in spiritual circles, they say you have to direct your thoughts out into the universe, and the universe will manifest for you. Now, how does the universe know what you're thinking? So the idea is that this is how the universe knows. And many of the yogis in the Himalayas, and many of the great yogis, they spend hours and hours every day meditating. You know, what we do for mindfulness is nothing for them. Sometimes they surround themselves with fire and hot coals, and they just sit in the heat of the midday sun in meditation, just focusing the mind and concentrating on trying to experience and connect with that little piece of godliness that is there existing within us. So this is called Param Atma. And if you remember, I mentioned that Atma is the soul, and Param means great. So when we say Param Atma, that means the great soul. So we're the little soul, and God is considered to be the Param Atma. He is the great soul. And then in the Bhagavad-gita, it's explained that the third level of realization is called Bhagavan. And we discussed this word at the beginning, if you remember, because we said Bhagavad-gita comes from the word Bhagavan, or one who possesses 6 opulences. So the idea of Bhagavan is that there is a personal form. There's a personal form to that energy of Brahman. There's a personal form that is the origin of the Param Atma, and that is the concept of Bhagavan, or the person of godliness. Now, any of these methods of understanding God is considered valid, and all of these are represented in the world that we see in all different faiths and religions and spiritual groups, they all have some concept of an aspect of divinity like that. So in the Bhagavad-gita, Krishna explains, Mamaivam so jiva loke, jiva bhuta sanatana. And he says that all the living entities are my eternal fragmental parts. So that means that it's sort of like if there's an original fire, and from that fire there are sparks that come off from the fire. And those sparks, they have the same quality as the original fire, but they're individual sparks. Or if you go to a gold mine and you take some of the gold out of the mine, that little particle of gold has the same quality as the gold mine. It's just not the same quantity. So the idea is that the Atma is of the same spiritual quality as God, but it is different in quantity, like that. So in the Gita, it's explained that there's another name for Isvara, or God, which is Krishna. And then there are many names for God, like Yahweh, or Allah, or Buddha, or Jehovah, or Vishnu. And Krishna, it's another name for God, or a term that describes God. And that term, Krishna, means the all-attractive. So that is actually what the word Krishna means. It means the all-attractive. And the principle of that is that all that is beautiful and all that is attractive in this world, that comes from God, and God is the source of that attraction, that attractiveness. And ultimately, in that way, God is the all-attractive feature, all-attractive form, because we're all, in one way or another, attracted to certain things of beauty, or certain tastes, or certain fragrances, certain sounds, certain things that we see. So there's a beauty potency that is attractive, that's attracting us, so like that. So that brings us back to this point of the principle of being kind of disconnected, that these little parts and parcels, they're disconnected from God, and in that disconnected state, we feel lost and disconnected, but we're actually not. We're as it's said in the Bhagavad-gita, we are eternally connected. So we just have to become reconnected, and in this way, we're always connected. But it's just that we've forgotten that connection. So when we reconnect, the Bhagavad-gita explains nicely that one who's not connected with the Supreme can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind. And we were discussing earlier about this principle of trying to steady the mind. And without which, if there's no transcendental intelligence or no steady mind, then there's no possibility of peace. And how can there be any happiness without peace? So everyone is searching for happiness. We discussed that already. And for there to be happiness, there has to be peace. And for there to be peace, there has to be a steady mind. And for there to be a steady mind, there has to be transcendental intelligence. Otherwise, there is simply bewilderment or ignorance and confusion. And in confusion, the mind is unsteady. The mind is unsteady, and that means we're not peaceful. And if we're not peaceful, then we can't really be happy. So the Bhagavad Gita explains this quite clearly. So in order to find that, we have to reconnect. And in that connecting process, what happens is we go from feeling disconnected and alone to feeling reconnected and whole. And in that connected wholeness, we actually feel a genuine peace. We feel a genuine safety and security, and we feel sheltered, and we feel love. So like that. So a little bit of a last reflection. So this is the last one for this session. We're almost done. How are we doing for time? Almost keeping on time, which is incredible. So last reflection with your journals. So discuss the idea of higher power. So this idea of a higher power is not a sectarian idea. In fact, the Alcoholics Anonymous groups and all the anonymous groups, they use this principle as part of their 12-step program. And they use a phrase which says that a power greater than ourselves. And the term sometimes refers to a supreme being or may refer to some sort of a deity or other conceptions of God. But their understanding is that believing in the higher power helps us to find a purpose, helps us to find some purpose in life. And regardless of the higher power we believe in, having faith in something bigger than ourselves can help us to find peace. So this is something that's coming from the anonymous groups. Now, if anyone's familiar with the anonymous groups, of course, there's, I think, Sex Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous. All of these anonymous groups, they come together, and one of their founding principles is that they find a higher power. And by finding this higher power, it helps them to overcome these heavy addictions and attachments, and they find peace. Oftentimes we're driven to addictions or attachments because of lack of peace and because we're searching for peace. So like that, some friends, we used to always say, it's time to smoke the peace pipe, you know, and we weren't smoking peace pipes. We were but anyway, everybody's looking for some peace. So this idea of a higher power, it helps us to realize that we're connected to something important. And the founders of the anonymous groups, they came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, which is an interesting concept, the way that they explain it, because that means that if you don't accept the higher power, then it must be some level of insanity. So it means almost that it's crazy to not accept. But by reconnecting with that higher power, again, we feel whole and we find peace. So my question to you for your journal is, what is your higher power? Maybe it's the famous, what's the band called? Sly and the Family Stone. They had a song called Higher Power, and I think the Red Hot Chili Peppers covered it some years later. Maybe that's it, you know? Maybe the Red Hot Chili Peppers are your higher power. I don't know. But whatever it is, I did a program at a company called Accenture. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Accenture. They're quite a huge consultancy. So I've given a few talks there, and I gave one talk and we were going on about this. And then we got to the end and I mentioned the topic of God. And then this lady in the back, she goes, "Oh, Jai, I was with you all the way until you brought up God, the God word. Oh, God. Oh, no, not God." And I said, "Sounds like you have some issues with God." And she said, "Well, I just don't believe in God." And I said, "It's okay. So, you know, what is your higher power? What is it that gives you? What's that important thing for you? What's that important number one thing?" And I was waiting for her to answer, and there was about 50 people in the room. And she said, "Well, it's my grandmother." And I said, "Okay, it's your grandma. Okay, amazing." And so I said, "Tell me about your grandma." And she started telling me how her grandma was so compassionate, so loving, so kind. And she started telling me a story about how she really helped some man when he got out of prison, and you know, and she didn't even know him, but she kind of gave him a chance and really helped him to transform him. And she said, and you know, "I love her so much, and she's so inspiring, and she's my higher power." And I said, "That's amazing." And everyone clapped and, you know, appreciated that she had understood who her higher power is. And I said, "Can I ask you something about your grandmother?" And she said, "Yeah, sure." And I said, "Was your grandmother a religious person?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Do you think your grandmother had some of her values because she had deep faith in a higher being?" And she went, oh my God, I never thought of that. And then all of a sudden it was like her whole world just opened up, and she realized that her higher power was still connected to an ultimate idea of the higher power. Because a lot of times these really good qualities come from a connection from something higher. So anyway, what is your higher power? So I'm destined to finish on time, and I'm 4 minutes late, but this is the next to the last slide. So this is another statement in the Bhagavad-gita, Gyantva mam shantim richati. Now those who are from kind of anyone who's from Indian background, they know that if they ever go to ceremonies like Hindu or Indian ceremonies, they always chant this word shanti, shanti, shanti. And the word shanti means peace. And we're all looking for peace. You know, all the 60s, they were all about peace. Everyone wants love, everyone wants peace, everyone wants happiness. So this in the Bhagavad-gita, it's explained that there is a formula for peace. And that formula is about reconnecting through this yoga process. And that way we can find the greatest satisfaction. And we have to remember that satisfaction does not come from outside, it comes from inside. So if we want real satisfaction, we have to find it in here. If we spend time looking for it out there, like that deer, if you remember the musk deer that we talked about in the beginning, searching everywhere for that aroma, eager, hungry to find it, but could never find it, and realized later the whole time it's been emanating from themselves. So it's the same. We have to find that satisfaction within. And when we find that satisfaction, then we can find real peace and real happiness. So like that. So next week we'll discuss what goes around comes around. So this is always a fun topic about the idea of karma and reincarnation. So we'll get into that next week. And I guess now if we have any time for questions and reflections, if I haven't gone over, I must be the worst speaker that Vrishni has ever dealt with. I never everyone goes to sleep. Everyone just turns off their screens and starts having to snooze. Okay. Anyone has any questions? I'd like to stop in the middle, but I'm feeling a call to get to the end. I see.
No, that's good. Any questions? Yeah, anyone can just unmute.
I just
Unmute or point the chat, yeah.
Amina's purpose in life is Netflix and to drink wine. That is great. I love it. Okay. Gosh, I didn't have the chat open. I could have been interacting more. I'll remember that next time. Okay, this is nice. Okay, anyone has anything they'd like to reflect back? Anything that stood out for anyone in the talk that resonated in some way that made them think, okay, that's a takeaway. That's a takeaway for this one. Anything?
Jai, you mentioned at some point that some people say that they can feel a higher power when in contact with nature.
Yes.
You said that you were going to cover this at some points. This is a specific topic. Because yeah, I think it's a lot of people can relate to that, because you're in contact with nature, especially in a place where you don't have a lot of or any buildings or any humans around, and then you just see that horizon in front of you, and you just, wow.
Yeah.
I'm so small, right?
Yes, perfect. Yes. Yes, we feel small. We recognize how little we actually are.
Exactly.
But in our day-to-day lives, what's our feeling?
It's I don't know. I don't think we realize where we sit actually in a day-to-day life. If you think about it, maybe I don't know. I don't know if I pay attention to this, on a daily basis. That's
a very important point. And often it's because we're in the center of our universe.
Yes.
So we don't get we think we're in the center, and we think everything that we think is so big and so important, and I'm so big and I'm so important. And then all of a sudden we get plopped in the middle of this huge landscape of nature, and we realize, oh my God, I'm so insignificant. And when we come face to face with our insignificance, we're humbled. And when we become humbled, we become receptive to understanding the truth. Does that make sense? But when we're boxed in our little world, we become so proud because we think we're the middle of everything, you know? So it's a really interesting dynamic with consciousness. And that's why, like you said, nature can make us present to some really amazing and powerful things that help us to realize that we're just a little speck in the grander landscape and scheme of things. And that humbling position can inspire us and encourage us to try to understand more of what we really are, instead of living inside of this mental projection or conjecture of what we think is going on. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And it's really easy when you just move from your front room to your bedroom, and you turn on the TV and you do whatever you do, and you live in your little world that you've created. But outside, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on. And then even inside, right now the world is in lockdown because of a tiny, tiny, tiny little virus. I mean, it's microscopic, and it's stopping the whole world, So we really don't know what's going on, but we proclaim day in and day out that we understand everything, we know everything. But then you get this tiny little bug, bang, stops the entire planet, shuts the whole thing down. And where's all the solutions then? Where's all the big scientists? Okay, now they've got a vaccine. But I mean, how many vaccines already exist? So many vaccines already exist, and disease just keeps coming. So it's not that it's going to stop anytime soon, because that is part of the way that this world works. The point is that we have to understand these things, and with a higher inquisitive nature and intelligence, we have to seek some ideas of what's really at the root of all this, what's really going on. Some people believe there is no answer, but I have a different opinion. And so does the Bhagavad-gita. Anyway, sorry, I took over for you. I just saw something that Kaylin said. This has been great. I'm seeing some overlaps and similarities between different religions and cultures. Yes, and it's cool to see how people accept the same truths regardless of background and location. Yeah, I really appreciate this, Kaylin, because when I was sort of growing up, I really was not into choosing any kind of religion, because I always felt that as soon as you chose one religion, you immediately became pitted against some other religion. But now I spend a lot of my time really connected with groups, people from many other religions, understanding how much commonality there is. And instead of focusing on the differences, we celebrate the differences, but we also focus on areas of overlap and areas of commonality. Because in essence, the principle of the spirit and understanding the soul, that's present there in every religion. And also a principle of a higher power, just sometimes we give it a different name. I think probably most people here speak different languages, Fernanda, you're from, did you say South America?
Yeah. From
Brazil, right?
Portuguese, yeah.
Oh, Portuguese. So how do you say sun in Portuguese?
Sun.
Sun, yes.
Sol.
Sol, yes. Which is interesting. That's a whole nother thing. We could get into that. And anyone speaks Hindi? You speak any Hindi? You speak French, right, Rishni?
Yeah.
What's French for the sun?
Soleil.
Soleil. Okay, so if Rishni and Fernanda, they start having a conversation, you could get into a whole argument and start World War III just about the way you say sun, right? And then I come in and say, no, it's the sun, and you say, shut up, you stupid American. And then someone else comes in and says, no, someone from India says, no, it's Surya Bhagavan. And it was like, oh, this is crazy. But we're all talking about the same exact thing. We're just talking about the same exact thing. We're just using different words. So it's like that. Oh, okay. Amina, your mom speaks Telugu and dad speaks Tamil. Okay. So yeah, so what's the Tamil word for son, Amina? Do you know? Okay. Maybe we should have used the moon and we could have asked Marcella. She could have told us. She's just asking your mom now. Great. Get your mom involved. This is awesome. So yeah, how do you say moon in Portuguese, Marcella?
Lua.
Lua.
Lua, yeah. Lua.
Yes, lua. Lunar.
Yeah,
Also
exactly.
comes from the Latin.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it in French?
La lune.
La lune.
Yeah.
La lune.
Similar.
La lune means the moon. La,
Yeah.
la means the, and lune means moon. Yeah, la lune. And in Hindi, I think it's Chandra. And here you go, Surya. Suryan means sun in Tamil. Yeah, perfect. So anyway, same object, but we have different names for it. So,
Jack, can I say something about one of the reflections?
yes, please, ma'am.
Because I think, I don't know, I consider myself a weird person.
Okay. I mean, I was
As you
thinking
might
the
have
same
noticed.
thing. I'm glad you said it.
But that part when you ask us to ask ourselves who am I and what's my purpose,
Yeah.
I don't really know the answer properly, but in the past I don't think about it anymore, because whenever I thought about who am I, what am I really focused on that, what am I doing here, I felt really weird. It's like I came outside. It was like an outside body experience, something
Yes.
like that, as if I was looking
OBE.
at myself and I didn't recognize it. It's like I didn't feel like myself. So I felt so weird that I stopped. I was like, no, let's stop thinking about that. So I don't know if it's normal, but it felt really, really, really strange for me. So it's like I couldn't. So I don't know how to answer. It's like I don't know. But so I try not to think about it anymore. I need to change that because it's an important question, I think. But it just felt weird, like if I wasn't myself whenever I thought about it. Is
So
it
that's-
any normal at all, like, or is that just me being weird in all senses? Like,
to be honest, I don't think it's that weird. It sounds like you were really deeply inquiring, and the point is that many people have an experience of them not being, or rather, many, let's say it in the positive way, many people have an experience of being something other than their body, because they have what's called an OBE, an out-of-body experience, or they have what's called an NDE, a near-death experience. So you often hear about people who were on the operating table and they felt themselves rise above their body and they were looking down on everything. And then they saw like a light and they started going towards the light, and then but then they went back into their body and they were able to tell the surgeon things that he said, things the nurse said, could tell, so then they go away from that having some revelation that who or whatever I am is not just connected to this body. So I would say in that sense, it's not strange. And you're not just a weirdo who lives on the moon and wears things like Princess Leia on her ears, You're not just a weirdo like that. I promise. You're not just a weirdo. You're not Moon Girl. No, that's not you, Marcella. So I mean, I think people who seriously inquire like that, and this is the point. I mean, for me, the point of this is to open up the Bhagavad-gita a little bit, but also, I mean, that's the main point, but it's also to get us to make some inquiry. So sometimes just to pose a question, it helps us to gain clarity and gain a deeper perspective on the situation. But I mean, if somehow if you start asking that question and you start fainting and passing out, then it might be getting a little strange. A little bit.
Yeah, I hope that doesn't happen. Yeah.
I hope not too. But it might be a sign of some levels of high spiritual ecstasy or something. Natural ecstasy. I'm not talking about any other kind of ecstasy. That's for sure. Okay. Anything else? Or
I know there's I know there's not much time. Sorry. Just a quick question. Maybe this is something for another day, but what does like Krishna says about dreams? Because sometimes I have dreams that are like out of body experience that seem really, really real. Like
yes.
I was there, but when you travel, when you have deja vu or things like that, do they say, is it any connection or?
Yeah, there's a term. God, the word just went out of my head. Begins with a V. Oh, where you? Why did the word just go out of my head? I'll remember it in a minute. But basically, where you can travel outside of the body. Gosh. It's like astral. Doesn't begin with a V. It begins with an A. It's an upside down V, like that. So astral traveling. So that idea is that because the soul can project outside of the body. I mean, when we go to sleep, the mind journeys in so many different places. So amongst the sages and the sadhus of India, sometimes they use the term that the sadhus or the ancient sages and the great yogis, that they can travel at the speed of the mind. So if you think of, like right now, we're all looking at you on the moon, okay? Now, this may sound a little crazy, but with consciousness, to the extent that we project there to the moon, then to that extent, to some extent, we're experiencing that. Does that make sense? Just like if you deeply meditate very strongly, because I presume you have some family members back in Brazil. It's from Brazil. You have some family members in Brazil?
Yeah, we do. Who's
there? Who's the closest family member you're to?
Our parents are there.
Okay, so your mom, your dad, which one are you? You're closer to your dad?
I think both, mostly my mom, I guess. My sister, maybe my dad.
Okay. You have another sister?
No, Fernanda.
Okay, Fernanda. Okay, it's just the two of you. All right. So if you start meditating on your mom really intensely, first of all, you'll feel her presence. For sure. You'll feel her presence with you, even if you meditate on her. And I know, because I've had this experience many times. So this is even beyond dreaming. This is like while you're awake. Mm-hmm. This is the power of consciousness, that sometimes I would do that. I would be thinking about my mom, and then I'd send her a message, and she would say, I was just thinking about you. And I was like, yeah, wow. We would get that all the time, or I would be like, I'd say to someone, oh, I was just thinking about my mom. And then the phone would ring, and I'd be, I bet that's my mom. And I'd pick it up, and I'd be like, Mom? She'd be like, how'd you know? And I'd be like, yeah, because you can be connected in that way. So these kind of things can happen. So there is something that's called astral traveling. And, the consciousness can project out of the body. The soul itself can also travel and journey to other places. And great yogis, they practice yoga and meditation for many, many years to be able to actually astral plane all around the solar system, the universe. We have one of our books is called Easy Journey to Other Planets. And it actually describes this whole phenomenon kind of in a very spiritually scientific way. So using an understanding of antimatter. So the principle of science is that they understand that there are particles of matter that you can measure, but for every particle of matter, there's a greater mass of antimatter that you can't see. That just like within any object, there's more space within the object than there is actual material particles, but it doesn't look like that to us. To the naked eye, it doesn't occur like that. So with this idea of antimatter, the principle is that that antimatter is Brahman. That is that spiritual matter that exists. So when we understand that, we start to realize that there are a lot of things that are possible that on the material platform, we don't know how that's possible or why that's possible, but it becomes very possible. So
Great. Thank you so much.
But it is possible also that sometimes our dreams are just a manufacturing of the consciousness reflecting back to us things that we've seen in the day or experienced. But there's a whole science and psychology around dream interpretation and things like that also.
Yeah. Great,
and I'm going to
thank you.
stop now, or else Vrishni's going to sack me. She's going to fire me.
Sorry.
No,
I'll never,
never.
I'll never get another gig in this town again.
Krishna